Hi everybody, it's Mrs. Mahmud here and welcome back to another installment of YouTube videos made by the English department. So in this week or today's lesson we'll be focusing on newspaper articles, as your next big piece of writing will be based around newspaper articles, and our objective today, we are learning to understand the purpose of newspaper articles and be able to structure introductions effectively. So as we are aware, all texts have a beginning, a middle and an end, but our focus today will be introductions, and we'll be focusing on middle and the end a little bit later. So with all your lessons, there are always keywords. So keywords for today are purpose, audience, features, introduction, and signpost. Some of these words you are familiar with, some of them may be a little bit tricky, but I'm going to go through the keywords on the next slide. Your lesson outcomes for today. So by the end of this lesson, you should be able to name a range of newspapers, understand the purpose and audience of different newspapers, identify features of a newspaper, understand the term signposting and be able to apply it to your writing, and finally use the model openings to write your own introduction to a newspaper report. Okay, so let's move on to the keywords. Oh, just before we do, when this symbol comes up, it means what I'd like you to do is pause and then try the activities that I've set out for you, and then press play so that we can sort of continue with the slides. Right, the keywords. So purpose. A lot of you would have heard the word purpose before, whether you're in year 7, 8 or 9. The purpose is, why has the text been written? Okay, so when you read a text, you question, what is the purpose of this text? When you are writing your own text, you will need to think about what is the purpose of what you are writing. Audience, who is it aimed at? Okay, so who will be reading that text? And that's really important, because the way you write it will be dependent on who your audience is. Features, techniques used deliberately by the writer to make it look like a particular text type. Introduction, the opening of a piece of writing to make the reader aware of what you will be discussing. And finally, signpost, sets out what you are going to say in the introduction. Okay, so that's probably the most newest word for you, but the rest, like I mentioned, are words that you would have heard. Right, so your first challenge then is, how many daily newspapers can you name? I've got a range of images. I want you to just take a moment and pause and think about which of these images you are familiar with that link to a newspaper. Okay, so just pause here and have a go at identifying the names of newspapers linked to these images. Okay, so let's have a look through these. Some of them are quite straightforward. A few of them I found tricky. Let's see if you've got them. So the first one seems quite straightforward. Did you get it? The Sun. The Sun newspaper. Next one. The Times. That was pretty straightforward too. The Daily Mirror. The Guardian. The Daily Star. The Daily Telegraph, that might have been a little bit of a tricky one. The Daily Mail, the Daily Express. Mr. Mahmud had to help me with that one. I struggled with that one when I first came upon it. And finally, the Independent. So I know in this day and age, newspapers are read rarely, as we can get a lot of the information on the internet, but they are still around. People still read them, even if you may not, and they have a purpose. So that it takes us to different papers for different people. So one of the things that you'll notice is there are certain newspapers that are structured and laid out in a certain way and others in a different way. Why? What is the purpose? And who is it aimed at? So if we first take the left-hand information, tabloid newspapers. When you think of tabloid, what comes to mind? Any of these papers tabloid? Right. So tabloid newspapers, the news is condensed. It's a shorter version. There's a lot of emotive and dramatic language. Shorter sentences are used. More fun words are used. And there's more celeb news and gossip. Okay, so go back a slide, think about some of those newspapers where there's a lot of celebrity news, like The Sun, for example. Broadsheet newspapers are, the news is detailed, longer sentences, there's more complex language, so the vocabulary is a little bit more complicated than a tabloid, and there's a lot of factual information. And then there's a third one that we don't necessarily look at all the time, but I think it's quite important. You've got the local and regional newspapers. So only local news or local angles on national news. Combination of tabloid and broadsheet. So you can see the little image at the bottom, like the Manchester Evening News, the MEN. That is a local newspaper, and that will give you information or inform the readers about what's happening in Manchester as opposed to other cities. So the Sun, the Daily Star, the Daily Mirror, they are all tabloid. And then we've got the Daily Telegraph, the Times, the Guardian, which are part of the broadsheet newspapers. So you can see that there's quite a clear difference in the way the news is presented, and that then links to the audience. Okay, so what is the purpose of a newspaper? I've got 4 purposes here. There are more purposes than these 4, but I've just selected these. So we've got the purpose to entertain, to persuade, to inform, to argue. What do you think the purpose is of newspapers? Which one could it be? Do newspapers entertain you? Do they persuade you? Do they inform you? Or do they present arguments? The answer is inform. You probably would have guessed that. It's inform. So what is inform? When we say the purpose of the newspaper is to inform, what does that mean? Okay, so inform, you could see from the word, the root word inform comes from information. Okay, so inform, information. And information, okay, is something that you give to someone. You're passing on knowledge and you're making others aware of a situation. And usually this is done through presenting facts. So can you see how this purpose is so clearly evident in newspapers? Because newspapers pass on knowledge. They make others aware of a situation, and generally they do this by presenting facts. Okay? Right, so let's think about the target audience. We've thought about the purpose, now the target audience. So we're going to go through these 4 characters here and what they like reading, and then we're going to pause for a moment and identify what type of newspaper would be suitable for these people. So if we go with the man at the top, I need to know about the latest business news in depth. and I have an hour-long train journey to work to read all about it. Which newspaper do you think best fits him as a target audience? The next one, the builder. I'm busy, so want to read short summaries of the latest news. So someone who's incredibly busy and hasn't got the time, what newspaper would best benefit that person? The woman at the bottom, I love to read about the latest celebrity news. And finally, I like to keep up to date about the latest news in my community. Okay, so just pause it there, and if you need to go back a slide and see if you can identify which newspaper would best suit which audience. Right, okay, so let's have a look. So the first one that I went through, broadsheet. Remember we said earlier on that the language is complicated, it goes into detail, so therefore someone who is business orientated, has the time, wants clear information, a broadsheet newspaper is best fitting for them. The next one, the next character we know is busy, needs quick summaries, tabloid. Okay, because we mentioned that they reduce the information, they give you just the information that you need, and it doesn't go on for pages. The lady at the bottom loves to read about celebrity news. Oh, tabloid. And then finally, I've already given you the answer for this one, is the local newspaper like the MEN, someone who wants to know about their community. Right, so we're going to give you a few more pieces of vocabulary, okay? But what I want you to do once I've gone through them is pause the video and see if you can match the definitions up with the newspaper vocabulary. These words are going to be important for the next couple of slides, so therefore this matching up exercise will definitely benefit you. So the vocabulary for newspapers, you've got masthead, you've got photo, you've got caption, headline, subheading, quotations, byline, introduction, stroke lead, and main body. Okay, so some of them you're familiar with, some of them you're not, and that's absolutely fine because I will give you the answers once you've started me up again. Okay, so just pause it now, have a go, get yourself some paper and pen and see if you can identify it, or use your fingers and join the vocabulary to the definitions. Okay, so these are the answers. So a masthead is information that is presented to you about the newspaper at the top. A photo, quite straightforward, is a picture of someone or something relevant to the report. A caption, again, very a word that's familiar, you should be familiar with, is a sentence underneath the picture that informs the reader who or what the picture is about. Headline, short, catchy, bold comment to engage and hook the reader. So we know usually the headline is quite bold, it's larger in font size, and in terms of the techniques the writers use, they'll try to catch your attention through using a rhetorical question, using alliteration, or even a pun, play on words. Subheading, a smaller heading to break up the story so that it is easier to read. Not all articles will have subheadings, but if you come across a second heading, we know it's a subheading. Quotations, comments taken directly from people involved in the report. So we're very familiar with quotations when we come to write a PEE paragraph, but when in newspaper articles, reporters will try and get comments from witnesses, from the people that they are writing about, so that it just makes it a little bit more interesting. There's someone else giving their opinion. A byline is the writer of the report, so usually after an article it does tell you who it's been written by. Introduction and lead. Well, firstly, it's in bold because our focus today will be the introduction, so it's in bold so that you can come back to it. But the introduction or the lead is the important first sentence or paragraph that summarizes the story and answers as many of the possible of the 5 W's: who, what, where, when, why, and a H, how. And finally, the main body, which is the story itself, giving you more information on the main points. And generally, it elaborates on the 5 W's and the how. Okay, so here we have a front page. And what I've done for you here is actually given you some of those key vocabulary and identified where you can see these particular techniques on the front cover. I have picked an article on Boris Johnson because he's very, very popular at the moment and is working extremely hard to help the country get through these hard, difficult times. So we've got the name, date and price at the top. You've got the name, which is the Sun newspaper. You've got the price, it's 25 pence. And there is a date there, which is a little bit blurry as the font is a little bit too small, but it's there. The masthead, information about the newspaper at the top. Again, it's a little bit blurry, but there's some information there based on the Sun. We've got the main headline. So we've just said a main headline is a headline, 4 or 5 words. It attracts the readers and also it includes some sort of technique. So here we have ballsy Boris comes out fighting. Can you spot any of the techniques there? Ballsy Boris, you've got alliteration. Okay, and think about what ballsy means. What does ballsy mean? Have a think. Okay, you've got your photograph and caption. Photographs have a sentence underneath them to explain what is happening. That's the caption. So you've got a photograph of Boris and he's got his fists up. Okay, so someone who's ballsy is someone who is willing to do what they need to do to get their message across. Sometimes they might cross barriers, okay, in order to do so. So the caption, hey big suspender. Do you notice anything about that caption? Suspender, hey big spender. Do you think that's a play on word? Okay. On the other side, at the top, you've got a story inside. So that's some information about another story that is inside the newspaper. Again, that's engaging the reader so that they can turn, in this case, to page 9 to find out whose hands they really are. You've got the introduction and the lead. Again, we can't really clearly read it, but we can almost see that first paragraph there. So that includes the 5 W's and the how. You've got the main body, which is the rest of the story. And right at the bottom, you've got the byline. Okay, it tells the reader who has written the story. So that's a quick overview of the various techniques that news reporters or editors use. And what I want you to do is, for this one, pause and have a go at identifying the different techniques. Okay, have a go at identifying the different techniques. Go back a few slides, have a look at the vocabulary and see where these techniques are on this particular opening page. I'll give you a few seconds. I'll pause it and then we'll move on. Right, so I haven't got the arrows here. See if you've identified where they are, but all these techniques are used in this particular heading also. Particular front cover also. So the story inside, the PM is ready to destroy anything that threatens his ambition. Okay, you have the main headline, outrage as Johnson suspends Parliament. The byline, okay, so you've got the writer right at the bottom. You've got the introduction and the lead, which can be seen in that first paragraph underneath the red writing. You've got the name, the date and the price right at the top. Again, it's very small, but it's there. Photograph and caption. Well, we definitely see the photograph of Boris Johnson. It's not very flattering, but it's there. And the caption, I'm not sure where the caption is here, but does it need a caption? Look at that face. And then the main body is the story giving more information on the main points. And this one is from The Guardian. It's based on the same story, but can you see how much detail there is on this newspaper? Can you remember, was it a broadsheet or a tabloid? Which one do you think The Guardian is?
It's a broadsheet.
Therefore, the detail is there. And can you see the title, the headline, outrage as Johnson suspends Parliament? It doesn't use the pun like it did in the earlier paper. Right, okay, so I did say the introduction and lead were part of our We Are Learning To. And on this slide and the next slide, we're talking about general introductions, and then we'll go back to specifically look at introductions within a newspaper article, because that will be the next big write that you do. So in structuring your writing, all writing follows a similar structure. It'll have a beginning, a middle and an end. Even text with a special kind of structure like letters follow this general rule. A good introduction is crucial. An introduction is really important. A good one will make your reader want to read on. So just under there we have two examples, and it tells you what type of introduction they are. So the first section in the green box will read, do you ever dream of a better bed? If your current bed is sad, hard or lumpy, it could be stopping you from getting the good night's sleep you deserve. So, and then it gives you a little bit of an explanation. So this is the introduction to a persuasive text that tries to sell something. It uses a question to get the reader's attention, and it makes the reader feel important. So within that introduction, you can see that the writer has tried to persuade you, and in order to do so, have used some Daforis techniques that you'll be familiar with, like the rhetorical question. Let's read the next one. I passionately believe that our school needs a breakfast club. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Research has proven time and time again that a good breakfast does wonders for our brains and our bodies. That introduction is completely different to the one above. So with this one, it's an argument. It sets out the argument clearly and uses strong language to convince the reader. Okay, and then the next one I've put in, again, is very Boris Johnson related. We have Boris is back. The Prime Minister is back in charge of the UK again after spending 3 weeks recovering from COVID-19. Boris Johnson started his first day back on the job by making a speech outside 10 Downing Street. He thanked the British people for continuing to stay home and following the guidelines to help save lives and protect the NHS, but warned that it was not time to come out of lockdown just yet. So this is an introduction to an informative newspaper report. It includes facts as well as the 5 W's and the how. Okay, so we've got 3 different examples of introductions, 3 different purposes: persuasive, argumentative, informative. But what they do is give you key information that you could then talk about later on in your text, in your writing. So signposting, that was a keyword that we looked at earlier on. It's probably a fairly new word to you. So signposting sets out what you are going to say. An introduction, especially in an essay or a speech, should set out what you're going to cover in the rest of the text. This is signposting. So let's have a read of the example. Choosing to live a healthier life doesn't need to be complicated. There are 3 simple things you can do to improve your health. Eat more fruit and vegetables, exercise regularly, and eat less junk food. This introduction clearly sets out what the text is going to cover and in what order. This way, the reader knows exactly what they are going to find in the text. And also from a technique point of view, look at the way the writers use the colon. So the colon introduces a list, and this is the best way of getting a colon into your writing, which is ambitious punctuation and varied punctuation. Get it into the introduction, because in the introduction, if you are going to make a list, put in that colon before the list, so you are then increasing your marks for your spelling, your punctuation and your grammar. Right, so what we're going to do now is taking that information on introductions, we're going to work through the CGP workbooks. So if you turn to page 62, if you grab a piece of paper, you could also make notes on your in your books. And we're going to try and attempt question 1 to 4 to begin with. Okay, so I guess what we're doing is we're doing your task as we go through this PowerPoint. So your first question is, pretend you are writing a speech to give to the Parent-Teacher Association of your school. Which of the following words and phrases would be good to use in your introduction? Okay, so have a go at that question. Look at the different options. There's 10 different options. Remember, think about the scenario. You are in a parent-teacher meeting. You are writing a speech for that meeting. What phrases would you use as part of your introduction? Next one. In a persuasive essay, you need to make sure your argument is clear in the introduction. Which of these introductions does this better? And explain why. So that's question 2. So read both. Read the first one and the second one. Which one do you think is better? Question 3. Below are an author's notes for the introduction of a story called Dancing Bob. Use the information below to write an introduction to the story. And finally, read this introduction to an essay about someone's favourite book. Explain why this introduction is not very engaging. Have a go, pause me here, have a go, and then you will find the answers in the back of your book, page 107. Okay, but just bear in mind, okay, that you need to try and do the responses before you look at the answers, because otherwise then it's not really helping you or benefiting you in any way. Okay, so just pause here, complete the 4 tasks, and then you can click again and we can continue with the lesson. Right, okay, so now that you've done questions 1 to 4, let's move on. These ones get a little bit more difficult, and they are their writing is a little bit more extended. So question 5, which of the following introductions signpost clearly what the structure of the leaflet is going to be? And most importantly, explain how. So if you go back a few slides and look at the signpost slide, signposting tells you clearly what you are going to be writing about, and usually it includes a list. Okay, so look through each of them, which one signposts clearly the structure of the leaflet. Okay. Question 6, signposting the structure of an essay is good because it lets the reader know what to expect. Write out the phrases and sentences below that would be useful for this. Okay, so here you read through the different sentences and you select the ones where signposting will be necessary. Okay, so you can just tick them if you wish, circle them. And then finally, I like this activity because it's just a little bit more extended. Below is part of an essay plan. It's for an essay explaining why the writer likes going on holiday to the Lake District. Write an introduction for this essay, signposting all of these points. So this question gives you information about what you are going to write in each paragraph. You can see in paragraph 1, we're talking about the beautiful scenery in the Lake District. In paragraph 2, the lots of outdoor activities. And finally, paragraph 3, the fun things to visit. So how can you, in your introduction, signpost these 3 things? So go back to the model introductions, maybe in question 2, in question 5, and see if you can utilize some of those sentences to help you write an introduction for question 7. Okay, have a go, pause me here, have a go at all the questions, and then once you play me again, that's your homework done. Okay, that's your task for this week completed, or for this session completed. And you can move on to just get a little bit more knowledge on newspaper articles to help you with the big write next week. Right, okay, so going back to the WALT, the second part was to focus on introductions and the lead paragraph, specifically in newspaper reports. So I'm going to go back to the model that I used earlier on, Boris is back, and think about why this is a good introduction or a lead paragraph to a newspaper report. We need to see whether we can identify the who, what, when, where, why, and how. Okay, so who is this article about? It's about Boris Johnson. What is it about? The fact that he has recovered from COVID-19 and is back at work. Where does this take place? Outside 10 Downing Street. It tells you quite clearly in the introduction, and also it's in the picture. Why? So why has it been written? To thank the country for following the guidelines, but also to warn them. And how has this information been given to you? It's by Boris making a speech. Okay, so quick aspire. We did talk a little bit about features and techniques earlier on in the PowerPoint. So can you spot any Forest techniques? Okay, so remember we found alliteration in the headline, we found a pun, but are there any Forest techniques in this particular opening? Because it's something that you could potentially use in your writing now that you are familiar with some of these techniques. Can you find any? So we can find the headline, Boris is back. You've got the alliteration. You have factual information. Okay, the Prime Minister is back. So we know that Boris Johnson is the Prime Minister. We have emotive language, but warned that it was not time to come out of lockdown just yet. Just that warning, creating some sort of emotion, still a little bit of fear. Okay, so that's a few Forest techniques. Let's see if you can have a go now. See if you can have a go. So once we've read through the article, I want you to pause, have a look at the who, what, when, where, how, why, and see whether it links or is similar to what I've got. So we've got gaming saws. So both of these articles were taken from the First News for April and May, just to make it a little bit simpler and for you. So video game usage has spiked dramatically since people have been told to stay at home. Online game site Steam has seen their all-time highest user figures so that's 20,312,000 people logged in at the same time. US telecommunications company Verizon has reported a 75% spike in gaming usage on their network at peak times. But it's not just the virtual world that is seeing success as people at home look for fun ways to pass the time. Sales of board games and jigsaws skyrocketed by 240% during the first week of the UK's lockdown. Monopoly Classic has proven the most popular game, with Cluedo and Scrabble not far behind. Arts and craft materials and construction toys like Lego have also seen big boosts in sales. So that's pretty much the entire article, but remember, we are just focusing on that introduction and that lead paragraph. So it's that first paragraph that you can see. So who, what, when, where, why, how. Have a pause, or pause the video, have a think, and see if you can write some of the answers down. Right, so who? Steam. What? It has seen an all-time high in users. When? During peak times. Where? Online. Why? People have been staying at home. And how? By logging in at the same time. So Steam has identified all these people because they've been logging in at the same time. Okay, right. So I'm going to ask you to complete a task now, and we're almost done. So we know that Stretford High closed quite a few weeks ago now. So imagine Stretford High being in the newspapers. Well, it was in the newspapers, but let's say Stretford High is in your newspaper. So I've written the headline, Stretford High School shuts its doors. I've got a lovely image of our school. What I want you to do is write the introduction or the lead paragraph to a newspaper report. The headline is Stretford High School shuts its doors. How can you include the 5 W's and the how to interest the reader? Okay, have a go at this task using your knowledge from your CGP books about structuring your writing. See if you can signpost any information that you're going to extend on later. See if you can use the 5 W's to give us information that you're going to expand on later. And is there anyone that you think is important that you can mention to help you with maybe the who? Have a go at this. This is your final task, to practice writing introductions. Right, so we're back to that first slide, just to go through the objective and the outcomes to see whether we have met them. So our objective was to understand the purpose of newspaper articles. So the purpose we know is to inform, and to be able to structure introductions effectively. So I've given you a range of introductions or models of introductions, from persuasive introductions to argumentative introductions to informative introductions. And we've established how within the introduction we need to signpost information and also use a few of the writing features, diaphoresis techniques, to make it a little bit engaging. So if we look at the outcomes, I think we've met them all. We've named a range of newspapers. We've understood the purpose and audience of different newspapers. So who would read a broadsheet, who would read a tabloid. We've identified features of a newspaper, understand the term signposting, and hopefully if you've done the activities from your CGP book, you've been able to apply it to your writing. and use the model openings to write your own introduction to a newspaper report, and that would have been the last task that you have done. Okay, so if you've done all the tasks expected of you from this PowerPoint video, then you have met all the outcomes. So well done. And then that is it from me. Just coming up, we have on Thursday 14th May the redrafting of your diary entry. You should have now received feedback from your teachers, and what we want you to do is edit your work and resubmit it to your class teacher. And the week beginning 18th May, so next week, Mrs. Mitchell-Brady will be going through persuasive and argumentative writing to help you with writing newspaper reports. Okay, so thank you for listening, and I will, or you will, hear from me very soon.